The afternoon sun hung low over the desert horizon when the stagecoach rattled into Silver Creek, a town built on dust, sweat, and the echo of gunfire. The main street was a ribbon of heat shimmering between weathered buildings, each one a promise of fortune or a warning of ruin. At the end of that road, the Silver Spur. Saloon glittered like a jewel in the dirt, its piano music spilling into the street, mingling with the bray of horses and the murmur of men seeking escape from long, punishing days. From the stagecoach stepped a young woman with a battered carpetbag and a simple blue dress faded by travel. Her name was Clara Bennett. The moment her boots touched the wooden sidewalk, the world seemed to pause for just a breath. A few cowhands stopped loading crates. The blacksmith looked up from his anvil. Even the piano in the saloon missed a note. There was something about her, something quiet but unyielding. She wasn't the kind of woman this town usually saw. Not anymore. Clara kept her head low, her straw bonnet tilted to shield her face from the sun and the stairs. She'd come a long way, 3 towns, 2 stagecoach transfers, and 1 broken promise behind her. Everything she owned fit in that single carpetbag: a change of clothes, a small Bible, and a photograph of her mother before the sickness took her. The rest, her past, her mistakes, her heartache, she'd buried somewhere far down the road. Silver Creek wasn't a place for the delicate or the naive. It was a town that chewed up drifters and dreamers alike. The mines had run dry, but greed and desire still flowed freely through its veins. Yet for Clara, it was a chance to disappear, to build something new where no one knew her name or what she'd run from. She approached the notice board outside the Mercantile, reading faded postings for ranch hands, seamstresses, and housekeepers. Most were months old. Then a newer paper caught her eye, a crooked sign scrawled in rough ink. Help wanted, Silver Spur Saloon. Must be quick, clean, and decent. Her fingers brushed the edge of the sign as she read it again. A saloon job wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd left home. Her father used to warn her, a saloon girl walks a narrow edge between respect and ruin. But hunger and exhaustion had a way of silencing pride. She folded the paper and set her jaw. Decent, she whispered to herself. That I can still be. The saloon doors creaked as she stepped inside. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and stale perfume filled the air. A few men looked up, half interested, half suspicious. Behind the counter stood Miss Lila, a woman in her 40s with painted lips and eyes that missed nothing. She leaned on the bar and gave Clara a long, measuring look. "You here for the job?" she asked, voice raspy from years of smoke and laughter. Clara nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I can work hard. I don't drink and I don't cause trouble." Miss Lila smirked. "We'll see about that. You pour drinks, wipe tables, and keep a smile on your face. Pays $2 a week, board included. You run your mouth or flirt too much with the wrong men, and I'll have you on that stagecoach out by morning. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara said again. Miss Lila studied her for another heartbeat, then waved toward the back. "There's an empty cot upstairs. Get yourself settled, sugar. You start tonight." As Clara climbed the narrow stairs, she could still feel the weight of the stairs below. Some curious, some cruel, and one especially watchful pair that belonged to Sheriff Wade. Holloway sitting alone at a corner table, spinning his badge between his fingers. His smile was faint, but it carried the sharpness of a knife. Clara didn't see it yet, but that look marked the beginning of everything that would come. Evening came quick in Silver Creek, washing the dusty town in gold before the lamps flickered to life. The Silver Spur Saloon woke up like a beast after sleep, piano keys trilling, laughter rising, boots stomping against creaking floors. Behind the bar, Miss Lila barked orders while her girls flitted between tables like painted butterflies, carrying trays heavy with whiskey and cards. And at the end of that rush stood Clara Bennett, hairpin neat, sleeves rolled up, eyes steady. She'd scrubbed the bar twice already, trying to look useful, to quiet the storm of nerves in her chest. The saloon was unlike any place she'd ever seen, loud, smoky, alive. Men shouted over hands of poker, coins clattered, and a brawl nearly broke out near the back before Lila's sharp voice cut through the noise like a whip. "Let him fight outside, not on my floors." Clara jumped at the sound but didn't flinch. She had decided long before stepping into this place that she would endure whatever came, no matter the laughter, the remarks, the lingering looks. Work was work, and she had nowhere else to go. Miss Lila, watching from the bar, gave a half smile. "You're holding up better than most girls on their first night," she said, filling 2 glasses with amber liquor. "The cowhands get rowdy, the miners get mouthy. Best thing you can do is pour, smile, and walk away. Don't get tangled in their talk, especially not with the sheriff." Clara blinked. "The sheriff?" Lila's eyes narrowed toward the door. "Wade Holloway. He owns this town more than the mayor does. Folks fear him, and he likes it that way. You do well to keep a light distance." As if summoned by his name, the saloon doors swung open, and in strode Sheriff Holloway himself, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver badge catching the lamplight. He carried himself with the lazy confidence of a man who'd never once been told no. Conversation dulled as he crossed the room, his spurs ringing soft against the wooden floor. "Evenin', Lila," he drawled, resting his hat on the bar. "Place smells better tonight. You hiring new help?" Miss Lila's eyes darted toward Clara, who was busy wiping down the far table, pretending not to notice him. "Just a girl passing through. Hard worker, quiet." The sheriff's gaze followed her movements, the curve of her neck, the careful way she carried herself, the gentleness in hands that had clearly known hard labor. "Quiet, huh?" he murmured. "We'll see how long that lasts." He pushed away from the bar and sauntered over, his shadow falling across her. "You new here, miss?" Clara turned, polite but distant. "Yes, sir." "Just working," he smiled, not kindly. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be serving whiskey to drunk cowboys. You ought to have a gentleman looking after you." "I can look after myself," she said, voice soft but firm. The sheriff's grin froze for just a moment. Then he tipped his hat, eyes glinting. "We'll see about that." He walked away, but the tension lingered like smoke after gunfire. When he left, Miss Lila came to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You handled him fine, but mind my words, Holloway doesn't take kindly to refusals. Keep your wits about you, girl." Clara nodded, though her heart beat hard. She'd dealt with men like him before, men who wore power like armor and thought kindness a weakness. She wouldn't bow again, not to anyone. Later that night, when the saloon finally quieted and the lanterns burned low, Clara washed the last of the glasses and looked out the window to the dark, sleeping town. She could still see the sheriff's boots in her mind, hear the way his voice coiled around her name. But above the din of worry, one thought stood stronger than the rest. She had survived worse. And if Silver Creek meant a new beginning, she'd fight to keep it, even if that meant standing her ground against the man who ruled it. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, if such a thing could exist in a place like the Silver Spur Saloon. Clara rose early, helped Miss Lila sweep up the shattered glass and spilled whiskey from the night before, then spent her evenings serving drinks with a smile that rarely reached her eyes. She was learning how to blend in, to move quietly through the noise, to let the chaos swirl around her without touching her heart. But Sheriff Wade Holloway had taken notice. He began showing up more often, always around the same hour, just before the piano started its nightly tune. His boots made a familiar sound on the saloon's floorboards, and the moment that sound echoed through the room, every gambler and drifter straightened up, every laugh grew a shade quieter. The sheriff's authority wasn't written in laws or ink. It was written in fear, and that fear followed him like a shadow. He'd take his usual table near the window, facing the door, where no one could sneak up behind him. And from there, he'd watch Clara. Not speak at first, just watch. Sometimes she could feel his eyes on her, heavy as chains. Sheriff's got himself a new hobby. One of the cowhands whispered one night, leaning too close to her as she refilled his drink. "Don't know whether to envy you or pray for you." She didn't respond, only straightened up and walked away, pretending the words didn't sting. At first, Sheriff Holloway kept his distance. Small talk when she passed by, a compliment here and there. "You're wasted in a place like this," he told her one night, his tone half flirt, half command. "You could do better than pouring drinks for men with dirt under their nails." Clara smiled faintly, keeping her voice steady. "I reckon work is work, Sheriff. It keeps a roof over my head." He chuckled. "You've got spirit. I like that." "Most women don't." "Maybe most women know when to hold their tongue," she replied before she could stop herself. His eyes hardened, just for a second, then his grin returned, slower, colder. "You'll learn when to hold yours, too." After that, his visits became more possessive, more deliberate. He'd sit closer to the bar, buy her small trinkets from the general store, a hair ribbon, a silver brooch, things she never accepted. The gifts stayed untouched behind the counter until Lila quietly removed them one morning and threw them away. Lila noticed the sheriff's growing interest and warned her again. "He's not the kind of man who hears the word no, Clara. If he set his sights on you, you'll need to tread careful. Some men bruise your pride. That one bruises worse." "I've dealt with worse," Clara answered softly, though her hands trembled as she wiped down the bar. The town began to whisper. People noticed the way Holloway's gaze followed her, the way he bristled when other men spoke kindly to her. Rumors spread fast in Silver Creek, and in a place that thrived on gossip, the sheriff's obsession became its favorite tale. One night, as the saloon quieted after closing, Clara stepped out to the back alley to toss out a bucket of dirty water. The stars were faint above the desert haze. She didn't hear him until his hand closed around her wrist. "You shouldn't walk alone at night," Holloway said softly, almost kindly, though his grip was firm enough to hurt. "Dangerous town." Clara tried to pull back. "Let go, Sheriff," he smiled, leaning close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "I'm just looking out for you. You don't belong here, Clara. You belong with someone who can keep you safe. I don't need saving." His jaw tightened and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Every woman does. You'll see." Then he released her and walked away, leaving her alone in the alley, the night air colder than before. From the saloon window, unseen, Luke Carver watched the whole thing. The ranch hand with the quiet eyes who had never spoken more than a few words to her. His hand clenched around his glass until it cracked. He knew trouble when he saw it, and trouble had just put its mark on her. The next few weeks brought colder nights and longer shadows across Silver Creek. Winter crept down from the hills, and the saloon became the only warm place left for miles, a haven for tired ranch hands, miners, and drifters looking to forget the cold or their own sins. And among them, sitting alone at his usual corner table, was Luke Carver. He wasn't the kind of man who spoke much. His words were measured, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man who'd learned that silence often said more than talk ever could. He'd ride into town once every week after working the cattle drives, dust clinging to his coat, hat pulled low, eyes a shade of gray that could turn to steel in the right light. Most folks didn't know much about him, only that he worked for the Whitaker Ranch, kept to himself, and never started trouble. But there was something about him that made even the roughest cowhands keep their distance. A stillness, an air of quiet danger, as if he'd seen more than he cared to remember. Clara first noticed him one slow night when the music had gone quiet and most of the crowd had staggered home. He sat nursing a single glass of rye, staring not at her, but at the door, as if always expecting something bad to walk through it. "You're a quiet one," she said gently, breaking the silence as she wiped down the counter near his table. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were calm but unreadable. "Talk wastes breath most nights," he said simply, his voice low and rough from disuse. Clara smiled faintly. "You talkin' now." That earned her the smallest flicker of a grin, gone as quickly as it came. Over the next few evenings, he became a steady presence, always in the same spot, always polite. Never touched her, never asked for more than one drink. While other men tried to flirt or grab her hand, Luke only watched quietly when things got rowdy, and if someone stepped too far, a single look from him was often enough to make them back off. Miss Lila noticed too. "That cowboy's got a soft spot for you," she teased one morning as they cleaned up. "Ain't said a word to anyone else since you got here." Clara shook her head. "He's just kind. That's rare enough around here." But kindness was dangerous in a place ruled by power, and Sheriff Holloway's eyes were everywhere. The sheriff's visits had grown colder, his tone sharper. Every time he saw Luke sitting there, his jaw would tighten just a little more. One night the tension finally showed. Holloway walked in, swaggering as always, and dropped a silver coin on the counter. "Whiskey," he said, his eyes fixed not on his drink, but on Clara, and then on Luke, sitting silent in the corner. "You new in town, cowboy?" the sheriff asked, his voice dripping with challenge. Luke didn't look up. "Been here long enough. Long enough to forget your manners?" Luke finally met his gaze. "Long enough to mind my own business." The room went still. Even the piano player stopped. Clara's heart kicked in her chest. The sheriff smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You keep doing that. Would hate for your business to turn into trouble?" Luke tipped his hat slightly. "Trouble usually finds me on its own." When the sheriff finally turned away, muttering something under his breath, Clara exhaled shakily. She looked at Luke, who only shrugged. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. He gave a faint, sad smile. Some things need saying. From that night on, an unspoken bond formed between them, something fragile, born from shared quiet and the understanding of two people who'd both seen too much. Luke never said it, but his eyes told her everything. He knew what the sheriff was, and he wasn't going to let her face it alone. What neither of them knew then was how fast that promise would be tested and how much it would cost. The tension in Silver Creek grew thicker with every passing day, like a storm that everyone could sense, but no one dared name. Sheriff Wade Holloway's patience, or pride, was wearing thin. His smile had turned sharp, his voice harder each time he spoke to Clara Bennett. And though she tried to keep her head down, every move she made seemed to draw his eye. The townsfolk had begun to whisper openly now. "Sheriff's got his temper up," they'd say. "That saloon girl's walking on borrowed time." But Clara couldn't bring herself to leave. For the first time in years, she felt she had a place, no matter how fragile. The Silver Spur wasn't much, but it was a roof, a wage, and a chance to build something new. And then there was Luke Carver, the quiet cowboy who'd become her only sense of calm. He never spoke of it, but his presence beside her each night after closing was protection enough. The sheriff noticed. He started coming to the saloon earlier, staying later, drinking harder. He didn't talk about law anymore, only about Clara, about how she should be grateful for his attention, about how a woman like her needed a man to give her a name again. Clara stopped serving him personally, letting Miss Leila handle it instead. But one night, when the saloon was near empty, Holloway decided he'd had enough of her silence. She was taking out the trash behind the building when his voice cut through the dark. "You been avoiding me, Clara?" She froze. The sound of his boots against gravel made her skin crawl. "It's late, Sheriff," she said quietly, keeping her back straight. "You shouldn't be here. I'll decide where I ought to be." He stepped closer, the lamplight glinting off his badge. "I've been patient, darlin', Lord knows I have. But it's time you made up your mind." "My mind's made," she said, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm not yours, Sheriff. I never will be." His face darkened, the mask of charm slipping. "You think you can say no to me? In my town?" "This town don't belong to you," she said, voice rising now. It belongs to whoever can live in it without fear. The slap of his hand against the wall beside her made her flinch. He leaned close, his breath thick with whiskey. You listen to me, girl. You'll be my wife before spring, or you'll be gone from Silver Creek before sunrise. I won't have folks thinking they can make a fool out of me. He gripped her wrist, hard, the same way he had weeks before. But this time, a shadow moved in the darkness. Let her go, a calm voice said. Holloway turned to see Luke Carver stepping from the alley, hat low, hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Didn't know you made a habit of lurking in alleys, ranch hand, the sheriff said coldly. Luke didn't blink. Didn't know lawmen made a habit of threatening women. For a long, terrible second, no one moved. The night air was heavy with dust and silence. Then the sheriff released her wrist with a sneer. This ain't your concern. It is now. Holloway's jaw worked, rage simmering behind his eyes. Careful, boy. You don't know who you're standing against. Luke took a step closer. A man who thinks fear makes him powerful. The sheriff's laugh was low, dangerous. You just made a mistake, son. He turned and walked away, but his words lingered like smoke. If you want her, cowboy, you'll have to prove you're man enough to keep her. When he was gone, Clara's knees nearly gave out. Luke caught her gently, his hands rough but careful. He'll come for you, she whispered. He met her gaze with quiet resolve. Then I'll be ready. And from that moment, Silver Creek held its breath. Everyone knew a reckoning was coming. By the next morning, the entire town of Silver Creek knew what had happened behind the Silver Spur Saloon. News spread faster than wildfire in a dry canyon. How the sheriff had cornered Clara Bennett and how Luke Carver, the quiet ranch hand who never spoke out of turn, had stepped between them. The story changed with each telling, of course. In one version, Luke had drawn his gun. In another, he'd struck the sheriff and lived to tell about it. But one thing stayed true in every version. The sheriff's pride had been wounded. For a man like Wade Holloway, pride was everything. He wasn't just the law. He was the symbol of control, of fear, of order in a town too wild for rules. And now, before everyone's eyes, a cowboy had made him look small. That afternoon, Holloway walked into the saloon in broad daylight, something he never did, with his badge gleaming and his temper barely caged. Men fell silent at their tables. Even the piano player stopped mid-song. He called out, voice carrying like thunder, "Where's that ranch hand? The one who thinks he's a hero." Luke was there, as always, seated near the back, calm as still water. He looked up slowly. "You found him?" The sheriff smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you can humiliate me in front of half the town and walk away? That ain't how Silver Creek works." Luke didn't answer, just set his glass down. "I tell you what," the sheriff continued, his voice rising. "If you're so sure you can protect that girl, why don't you prove it? Tomorrow noon, out by the old corral, you and me. No badges, no laws, just two men settling a matter." A murmur ran through the saloon. Everyone knew what that meant. It wasn't a brawl. It was a duel in everything but name. Miss Lila stepped forward, her voice hard. "Wade, don't you bring blood into my place?" He tipped his hat mockingly. "Wouldn't dream of it, Lila. Just giving the cowboy a fair chance to die with his boots on." Then he left, leaving the entire room frozen in stunned silence. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She turned to Luke, her voice breaking. "Don't do it, please. He is not looking for justice. He's looking for a reason to kill you." Luke stood slowly, his chair scraping across the floor. "He'll come for me whether I show up or not. Might as well meet him on my feet." She stepped closer, gripping his sleeve. "You don't owe me this." He met her eyes, calm but steady. "Don't I?" The words hit her harder than a shout. She wanted to argue, to tell him to run, to let her leave town alone. But the look in his eyes stopped her. Not pride, not foolish bravery, but a quiet, unshakable sense of right. That night, the saloon stayed empty long after closing. Luke sat cleaning his revolver by lantern light, movement slow and sure. Miss Lila sat nearby, silent, watching him. Finally, she said, "You ever kill a man, Luke?" He paused, then answered simply, "Once. Didn't sleep right for a year after." Lila nodded, her expression softening. "He's not worth that kind of hurt." Luke's gaze drifted toward the stairs, where Clara was sleeping fitfully in the room above. "Some things are," he murmured. When dawn came, Clara found him saddling his horse outside. The world was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. She wanted to beg him to stop, but she saw it in his face. It was too late for words. Instead, she said softly, "Come back to me." Luke hesitated, then touched the brim of his hat. "I'll do my best." As he rode off toward the old corral, the wind carried the whisper of dust and fate. By noon, the town would gather, and Silver Creek would never be the same again. By the time the next day's sun climbed high over Silver Creek, the whole town was holding its breath. Word of the challenge between Sheriff Wade Holloway and Luke Carver had spread beyond the saloon, across the blacksmith's yard, through the general store, even out to the ranches on the edge of town. Men rode in from miles around to see the fight that everyone said was coming. But noon came and went, and there was no gunfire. Luke never showed up at the corral. Instead, he stayed out of sight, working the range, silent as always. Some said he'd lost his nerve. Others said he was waiting for the right moment. The sheriff, red-faced and furious, had stood in the dust for nearly an hour before storming off, vowing that this ain't over. That night, the Silver Spur Saloon was packed to the rafters. You could taste the tension in the air, thick as smoke. The piano played, but no one listened. Every conversation was just a whisper about what would happen next, whether the sheriff would come for blood or whether Luke would finally face him. Clara Bennett worked quietly, her hands steady but her heart restless. She hadn't seen Luke since dawn, and fear chewed at her thoughts like a coyote on bone. She'd told him to stay away, to run if he had to, but she also knew he wasn't a man who ran from what was right. As the clock neared midnight, the saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Holloway stepped inside, boots echoing against the floorboards, his badge glinting under the lantern light. The crowd fell silent at once. He looked around slowly, savoring the fear that followed him like perfume. When his eyes found Clara, a cruel smile touched his lips. "Evenin', folks," he said, voice smooth as oil. "Fine night for a drink." No one answered. He walked to the bar, leaned his elbows on the counter, and nodded toward her. "Pour me one, sweetheart." Clara froze. Her hands itched to obey, years of habit and fear pulling her toward him. But then she looked up, straight into his eyes, and something inside her hardened. "No," she said quietly. The single word cut through the silence like a whip. The sheriff straightened. "What was that?" She swallowed but didn't look away. "I said no. You're not welcome here." You could hear a pin drop. The piano player's hands hovered above the keys, unsure whether to keep playing. The sheriff laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Girl, you forget who keeps this town in line?" "I didn't forget," Clara said, her voice trembling but strong. "I just stopped caring." He took a step toward her, eyes narrowing. "Careful now. Don't write a check your friend can't cash." And that was when a chair scraped across the floor. From the far corner of the room, Luke Carver rose to his feet. The movement was slow, deliberate, but the sound of it carried through the stillness. He wore his hat low, his jaw set, his shadow stretching long behind him. The sheriff turned, his mouth curling in a sneer. "Well, look who finally decided to show." Luke's voice came calm and steady, but there was iron in it. "You heard the lady." "You're not welcome here." Holloway laughed again. "You think you can back her words with a gun, cowboy?" Luke didn't reach for his weapon, not yet. I don't need a gun to tell you to leave." The sheriff's hand twitched toward his holster. The room held its breath. Clara's voice broke through the tension. "Please, don't." But before she could finish, Holloway's hand flashed and the world erupted in sound. A gunshot cracked through the air, followed by the crash of glass and the panicked screams of onlookers diving for cover. The piano tipped over. Bottles shattered. Smoke filled the room. When the haze cleared, both men stood, guns drawn, eyes locked, waiting for the next move that would decide everything. Outside, the cold wind swept through the empty street, rattling a loose shutter against the saloon window. Inside, time itself seemed to hold still. This was the reckoning, and Silver Creek would remember it forever. Smoke still hung heavy in the air of the Silver Spur Saloon, curling between lanterns and bullet holes. No one dared to breathe too loud. The single gunshot that had shattered the stillness moments ago still echoed in everyone's ears. Sheriff Wade Holloway stood near the bar, his revolver drawn, a smirk curling under his mustache. Across from him, Luke Carver stood steady, one hand resting on his gun, eyes hard as stone. Between them, Clara Bennett stood frozen, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. "Didn't figure you for a coward, Carver," the sheriff taunted, his voice dripping venom. "You had your chance today and you didn't show. Now you think you can stand here and steal what's mine?" Luke's voice came low and quiet, but it cut through the smoky air like steel. "She ain't yours," the sheriff chuckled darkly. "Everything in this town is mine. Not her," Luke said, taking a step forward. The crowd pressed back against the walls, afraid to even blink. Holloway tilted his head. "You gonna make a claim, ranch hand? Is that what this is? You think you can walk in here, play hero, and take what belongs to me?" Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't want this, not the violence, not the spectacle, but there was no turning back now. His hand hovered near his gun, his voice low but firm. "She's not a thing you can own. She's a woman. And if you lay a hand on her again, you'll answer to me." The sheriff laughed, loud, cruel, drunk with his own rage. "You? You're just dirt under my boots, boy. You think she wants a nobody like you?" Luke said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence spoke for him. Then Holloway turned his attention to Clara. "Tell him," he said, his tone dropping to something cold and dangerous. "Tell him you don't need his help. Tell him you're mine." Clara's lips trembled, but she lifted her chin. "I don't belong to anyone." For a split second, time stopped. Then the sheriff lunged, grabbing her arm and jerking her close. "You'll regret that." The sound of a chair scraping broke through the room again. Luke's gun was out before anyone could blink. He didn't aim for long. He didn't have to. The bullet struck Holloway's hand, sending his revolver spinning across the floor. The sheriff howled in pain, clutching his bleeding wrist. Gasps filled the room. Luke stepped forward, calm but deadly, his revolver still steady in his hand. "She's mine," he said quietly. It wasn't a boast, nor a claim of ownership. It was a declaration, a promise. A line drawn in the sand that no man, not even the law, would cross. The sheriff's good hand reached for his fallen gun, but Luke kicked it away, sending it skidding under a table. "You've done enough, Holloway," he said. "You're finished." For a moment, the sheriff looked like he might lunge again. But then his eyes met Luke's, and something in that cold, steady gaze broke him. He staggered back, breathing hard, pride bleeding faster than his hand. "This ain't over," he spat. Luke holstered his revolver. "It is for you." Two deputies who'd been watching from the doorway stepped forward, uncertain. The sheriff glared at them, but they didn't move to help him. One of them muttered, "It's over, Wade." As Holloway stumbled out into the street, the room slowly exhaled. The danger was gone, but the silence felt heavier than before. Luke turned to Clara. Her eyes were wide with fear and relief, tears catching the lantern light. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. He gave her a faint, tired smile. Didn't see another choice. For the first time in years, Clara felt safe and terrified all at once. The sheriff was humiliated, but he wasn't the kind of man to stay gone for long. Still, as Luke took her trembling hand and led her toward the stairs, she felt something stronger than fear, something like hope. The town had seen a man fall and another rise, but to Clara, it wasn't about victory. It was about freedom. And that night, for the first time, she dared to believe she might finally be free. The dawn that followed was unlike any the town of Silver Creek had ever seen. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with something no one could quite name, not fear, not relief, but a tense stillness that came after years of silence had finally been broken. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, the scent of gunpowder still lingered. The shattered bottle glass sparkled under the morning sun streaming through the cracked windows. Clara swept the floor slowly, her movement steady but her mind far away. Every sweep of her broom dragged up the echoes of last night, the sheriff's threat, Luke's voice saying, "She's mine," and the single gunshot that changed everything. Luke was gone when she woke that morning. He hadn't said where he was headed, only that he had something to do before things got worse. Clara knew what that meant, and it terrified her. Outside, people whispered. Some said Luke Carver had done what no one else dared, stood up to a lawman gone rotten. Others said he was a fool who'd brought trouble on everyone. The sheriff, they claimed, was holed up in his office, his hand bandaged, his pride bleeding worse than the wound. His deputies had scattered, unsure which side of the law they stood on anymore. By mid-morning, Clara could feel the town shifting. Men nodded to her when she passed, not with the old kind of pity or condescension, but with quiet respect. Women smiled faintly from porches, their eyes soft, like maybe they believed in courage again. But all Clara could think about was Luke. She found him near the old Bennett farm, standing by the fence where the wildflowers grew thick after spring rain. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hat pushed back, and his hands were working, repairing a rail that had broken years ago. "You came back," she said, her voice small against the wind. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Didn't know how to leave without fixing what was broke." She stepped closer. "You shouldn't be here. If Holloway finds you," Luke shook his head. "Let him come. The town saw what he is. He ain't got power left to scare anyone now." Clara looked down at her hands. "You risked your life for me. I didn't do it just for you," he said softly. "I did it because someone had to." She looked up, eyes glistening. "And now?" "Now," he said, leaning on the fence, "we see what comes next. Maybe we fix this place. Maybe we start over somewhere else." The idea of leaving both thrilled and frightened her. She'd never left Silver Creek, the saloon, the dust, the long nights of servitude. But when Luke said we, something inside her steadied. From across the field, an old rancher approached on horseback. It was Jed Miller, one of the oldest hands in the county. "Word spread," he said gruffly. "Town's tired of Holloway. Folks are talking about electing a new sheriff." Luke raised an eyebrow. "You got someone in mind?" Jed gave a slow grin. "Maybe a man who ain't afraid to stand up for what's right." Luke laughed softly, shaking his head. "Never figured myself for law." "Maybe that's what makes you fit for it," the old man said, tipping his hat before riding off. Clara smiled faintly. "He's right, you know." Luke looked at her, then at the horizon, the town, the hills, the rising light. For the first time, Silver Creek didn't look like a place to run from. It looked like a place that might finally be worth saving. He reached for her hand, rough and calloused, but steady. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said. Clara squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. Together. Behind them, the sun rose higher, catching the silver edges of the saloon sign, a quiet reminder of what had been lost and what had finally been found. For the first time in years, Silver Creek was waking up, not in fear, but in hope. A week passed since that fateful night in the Silver Spur Saloon, and Silver Creek was no longer the same town it had been. The change wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, like the slow thaw of winter ice. The sheriff's office door, once a symbol of fear, now hung crooked and empty. Wade Holloway had ridden out of town under the cover of night, nursing his wound and his shame. No one went after him, and no one mourned his leaving. For the first time in years, the townsfolk could breathe. The saloon reopened, but it was different, too. Clara no longer worked behind the bar with her eyes lowered and her words soft. She walked tall, her apron clean, her chin lifted when she spoke. The piano played livelier tunes now, and laughter, real laughter, returned to the room. Luke Carver became a quiet legend. Some folks called him the cowboy who tamed the law. Others said he was just the kind of man Silver Creek had been waiting for all along. But Luke didn't see himself that way. He kept working the Bennett farm, mending fences, patching roofs, fixing the little things that had fallen apart in Clara's world. He wasn't a man of speeches. His hands did his talking. Each morning, Clara would bring him coffee, and together they'd watch the sun spill over the valley. It became their ritual. A quiet beginning for two people who spent too long in the shadows. One morning, as the golden light touched the fields, Clara broke the silence. "You ever think about what comes next?" Luke smiled, still looking at the horizon. "Every day." "And?" He turned to her, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. "I reckon it's time this town had folks who care about it again. Folks who remember what right looks like." Clara tilted her head, a small smile forming. "You mean you?" He chuckled. "Maybe, but I can't do it alone." She met his gaze, the morning wind tugging at her hair. "Then you won't have to." That afternoon, the townspeople gathered outside the general store. Word had spread fast, a meeting to choose a new sheriff. The men argued, the women watched, and for a while it seemed no one could agree. Then old Jed Miller spoke up. "We don't need another man wearing a badge to scare us. We need someone who earned our respect, not demanded it." He pointed to Luke, who stood quietly near the back. "I say we make it official. The man already proved he's the kind we need." The crowd murmured, then clapped, then cheered. For the first time, Luke didn't step away. He simply nodded once. "I'll do it, but only if the law means something different this time. Fair for everyone. No more fear." A woman's voice called out from the back, Clara's. "Then that's a law worth standing behind." The town roared with approval. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Luke walked Clara home. The streets of Silver Creek glowed with lanterns and laughter, but his heart was calm. At her porch, she turned to him. "You changed everything," she whispered. He shook his head. "We did." She smiled, stepping closer. "And now?" He brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Now we build something worth keeping." The air was soft, the night warm. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, under the wide-open sky, he kissed her, gentle, certain, like a promise made to last. From the distance, the saloon piano carried a tune out into the quiet street, the same one that had once played through fear and sorrow, now ringing with hope. Silver Creek had been a town ruled by silence and shadow. But now, under that rising dawn, it belonged to those who'd found the courage to stand and to love. And for Luke and Clara, it was just the beginning.